Welcome, everybody. My name is Ursula Weinhoven from the ITU New York Liaison Office, and on behalf of my colleague Johanna Joachim from the UN Innovation Network and myself, I'm really pleased to welcome you to this session of TechLearnTalk. Today's theme is an introduction to holograms, and we're joined by Tom Wambeke from ITC-ILO, whom we'll introduce to you shortly. Before we start, we did want to share just a bit of context about this webinar series. Some of you may have joined before, but for those who have not, this webinar series seeks to help colleagues from across the UN understand new and emerging technologies and innovation a bit better. As the pace of digital transformation continues to speed up, it becomes even more important for us all to continue to boost our own digital literacy and capacity. So one of the biggest advocates in the UN, as we know, for innovation, digital technologies, leveraging ICTs for the SDGs and for capacity building has been the UN Secretary General himself. And he's repeatedly stressed that innovation is a priority. He's spearheaded initiatives, developed strategies and policy guidance, some of which is captured here on the slide. There's, for example, his strategy on new technologies, his report on digital financing task force, his roadmap for digital cooperation, guide to blockchain, his data strategy, and he's been a champion of the UN Innovation Network's Innovation Toolkit. And now, of course, there's also this report, Our Common Agenda, which has many proposals on digital issues. The UN Secretary General has expressed his expectation that everyone in the UN system will take steps to boost our own digital skills so that we can serve the world better and help the UN to achieve its mandates. So as a contribution towards that goal, the TechLearnTalk series seeks to raise awareness about new and emerging technologies and how they're being used in the UN. They seek to be jargon-free and not assume prior knowledge about the technology that is being introduced. And we also seek to create a safe and comfortable space for learning and to raise interest in learning more. So previous sessions have looked at issues, as you can see here, such as blockchain, AI, chatbots, drones, et cetera, and today we're super excited to take an introductory look at holograms. So if you have worked with holograms before, during the webinar, please do share some information in the chat. Whether have used holograms or not, please do use the Q&A function to ask any question that you may have, big or small, and we really, really encourage that. You can also see there other questions that colleagues have posted and give them a thumbs up if you're also interested in that question. So if we're short on time, we can ask those questions first. And as is our normal practice in these TechLearnTalk sessions, in this session today, there'll be two opportunities for Q&A. Once after the introduction to holograms presentation, the first part of it on the technology behind it. And again, after some examples of its use in the UN have been presented by Tom. And we're especially grateful to you, Tom, and also other colleagues from ITC-ILO for their collaboration on today's session. So we wanted to ask you a quick question to check familiarity with holograms. So here is a poll, all going well. So please do vote. And let's see, we'll get the results shortly. Okay, good. Yeah, that's totally the same like me. Heard of them, but don't know too much about them. Seems super interesting. So you've come to the right place. Still some answers coming in. I know a little bit. Okay, it seems to have closed. So let's end that. Great. Okay. Alrighty. So now we should add that, of course, we'll be sharing the recording and slides from today's session as we have for the previous sessions. They'll be posted on the UN Innovation Network website, uninnovation.network in the webinar library, along with the previous TechLearnTalk recordings and slides. And you can also find out more information at uninnovation.network/TechLearnTalks. So now it's our pleasure to introduce our wonderful speaker, Tom. He's the Chief of Learning Innovation at ITC-ILO. Tom specializes in providing sustainable learning solutions with the objective of generating impact and organizational change. Before joining the ITC-ILO, Tom was an assistant professor at the University of Leuven and an innovation coach at Open Higher Education. And the unit he's leading at ITC-ILO has a double mandate to strengthen the centre's in-house capacity to apply state-of-the-art learning and knowledge sharing methods and technology, and to provide e-learning services to outside partners on a global scale. And in this context, he works really closely with lots of other UN agencies, development banks, international organizations, governments, and NGOs. Thanks so much for joining us today, Tom, and for your willingness, of course, to share your expertise and knowledge. Over to you. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can do so. Yeah, we're really excited to hear you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ursula and Joanna, for organizing this tech talk. I promise not to use any jargon. I also promise not to use any abbreviation, as I'm an active member of the AAAA, which is the American Association Against the Abuse of Acronyms. It's always difficult with new technologies not to go into that direction. So I maybe tell a short story first, how I got involved into this world of hologram, because as you said in the introduction, I'm leading a team of 20 staff here that are based in Turin and that are focusing on new learning methodologies, new learning technologies, new digital media and design in function to accelerate and improve, let's say, improve capacity development. And the holograms are just one of it. And actually it all started with an extremely funny story, because I think it was last year or 2 years ago, I think somewhere in the midst of the pandemic, that our colleagues in the ILO from the communications team, usually they put a kind of April Fool's, let's say, post on the website, what was happening. And on the 1st of April, I opened the website and I see a kind of a hologram of the Director General with a kind of message that, yeah, all essential travel is abolished for the Director General. He only will appear as a hologram, and a kind of a funny story around that. Story only stays for one day. But when I was thinking about the story, and we were at that time doing research on holograms, we say, well, that won't be an April's Fool joke for a long time anymore, because the technology is evolving so fast. And it's becoming, holograms are coming real at this stage. And actually a lot of the people that I've met were in the stage very aligned with the results of this poll. You have heard about it somewhere. Maybe you saw the return of ABBA, or you saw somewhere in a museum a kind of an interesting hologram type of experience, but there's a little bit of mysticism around it. And also everything is called a hologram, and maybe not every time it is a hologram. So indeed, as Ursula mentioned, in this first part, I want to go into a little bit of what I would call clarification in there, so that at least we have a common vocabulary on it, and that we see what are the different things, because there's an entire spectrum of hologram, from really simple, let's say, objects to really advanced, almost ray lights that are out there. So after that initial stage of my presentation, we should have a vision on that one. And then, of course, comes the real part, because it's interesting to talk about holograms if you have not done it. And specifically in our work within the larger UN system, we would like, together with all the other colleagues here, to explore how can we increase the use of holograms across, let's say, the delivery of the different services, whether that's training, whether that's conferencing, whether that's events. I would like to piggyback on your thoughts and see how we could collaborate in the true spirit of SDG 17 and look for additional partnerships in here. But also critically asking, you know, as with many technologies, you know, are we surfing again on a new hype, or is there really something out there that could release us from our increasing Zoom fatigue? So that's a bit the outline of my, let's say, intervention today. But let me first start with sharing my screen, because I have a 1-minute tech explainer that actually is going to introduce one or two concepts and then I'll take over again, and just need to make sure that I'm on the same page while I'm sharing, and just checking a little bit if I'm on the right screen. Now I have to redo it. You see, I'm much more used as a hologram these days than on a Zoom kind of thing. So let me try a second time here and see if it works right now. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Do you see the...
Oh, it's a video. It says holograms, what's possible in the near future. Is that the one you want?
That's the one I want. So let me put it a little bit bigger on this one. I'm just going to listen 1 minute and 30. Just see if the sound is working. Let's start.
Circus Roncalli has a new treat for its visitors. Its animals are digitally rendered projections. The computer-generated bees are displayed on a thin, transparent screen. The holographic circus is a great idea. That way, the wild animals are being spared from being carted around in cages. But what exactly are holograms? Could we use them for communication? And what does the future hold in store for them? Let's have a look. By definition, a hologram is an image that appears to the naked eye to be three-dimensional. Images that require the aid of special glasses or other intermediaries are often incorrectly called holograms. Real holograms are created in a rather complicated process using lasers. So our elephant is not really a hologram, although the term is nowadays used for all kinds of technologies that look similar to the communication systems in Star Wars. And our gray friend here is no great novelty either. The idea has been especially popular in the live music industry for quite some time. We've seen the cartoon band Gorillaz on tour, the late rapper Tupac being digitally resurrected for a stage appearance, and Japanese anime pop star Hatsune Miku has been selling out big venues in her homeland. But compared to real holograms, these examples are somewhat underwhelming. Basically, they are simply two-dimensional projections onto a transparent screen. Seen from enough of a distance, though, they can look rather real.
Okay, so this is just a quick text explain, and what I've also curated for you is a number of, let's say, videos that give a little bit the introduction towards it to get a first initial clarification. But already in the video you can see not everything what we today consider as a hologram is a hologram. So I've now prepared, let's say, a few images of some of the holographic features that are out there that you might have seen. And then also will explain in the second part of the presentation which ones did we use for communication, for conferencing purposes, and for other things that we have done. So just give me a second again, as I need to, basically, I will disappear from the screen, but you will see my presentation as I'm trying to navigate between different computers here. It's a little bit more complex than it was before, but I'm getting a hang out of it. So I'm disappearing, but my presentation will now basically appear from you. So apart from this introduction, what is it all about? And if you would go technically what he says, like flat 2D holograms, well, in layman terms, what do we mean with it? It's basically a very simple and clever optical illusion, which was called the Pepper's ghost, a projection of an image onto an angled piece of glass, and that creates this kind of hostly presence. The problem is that they don't really have the depth or the volume making them really what we would call flat 2D. Sometimes you might have seen it also. A few companies have come out with what they would call these transparent projection screens, which you might have seen in an exhibition out there, but usually they are used for very smaller hologram projections out there. But the only thing that you need, and that's also quite becoming democratic these days, is a kind of a flat transparent screen, and of course a powerful projector. But as I said, it's still different than what we would call the three-dimensional hologram. What is becoming now very popular, and that's also one of the stories that we will come about, is these kind of booths, these spots with flat 2D holograms. They're exactly the same concept, but the image or the person is basically integrated into a contained box or a pot, as you will see. That's exactly what you see right here. We have a few videos lined up, which I also will share, that you exactly can see how that concept actually functions. Where do we make then the bridge with the more, let's say, advanced three-dimensional holograms? And I must say this presentation has been prepared by my colleague Nicole Palares, who's also here with us, who also might provide a little bit more on the technical specifications if needed. But when we move into the 3D holograms, we talk about, let's say, an image projected in 3D to a very specific container. That can be a boot or a pod, but it can also add three-dimensionality towards a VR, a virtual reality simulation, or an augmented reality simulation. So that would mean that also in VR, we could avoid using these avatars by streaming actual people live into a kind of simulation. Here, it requires much more than just a TV and a screenshot, multiple cameras to capture all the different angles of, let's say, the person. Also here, more and more the use of, let's say, these transparent projection screens you can see, specifically in museums or experience centers, you will already see the active deployment of these things, but most of it used for very smaller objects out here, as you can see the use of the glass. And then there are, of course, also much more advanced versions, high-speed ray device-based holograms, and that's based upon almost invisible layers which displace, let's say, projections. Can be done big, can be done small, can be used for also to project humans or object-based presentations. You also will see a lot of different, let's say, holographic displays. The disadvantage here, we are again a little bit more to the confinement of the screen or the size that you're using. And also here, what is also possible that it can become also a bit of interactive. As you see the moving hand there, you interact directly with, let's say, the holographic feature on the screen. Then there's also volumetric 3D holograms. As you can see here, they project basically an image onto a screen or in the air, a little bit the Star Wars feature that you saw before. But the main difference is that volumetric holograms, they create a volume, a three-dimensional volume, and the image points are material objects, at least for a brief moment. And this, in the entire story, what was important for us in the ITC-ILO, we have been working now for about 5 or 6 years, the use of virtual reality and augmented reality using headsets. But the problem was that when we want to scale that up, it was for us impossible to, I mean, we have been sending already more than 1,000 headsets across the globe in different UN agencies, but sometimes we have events where we have more than 1,000 people and not have the possibility to engage with technology or headsets. So we need something that is going beyond this. And that's one of the reasons why we moved into the world of holograms. But as you see, it goes further, it goes to invisible screen projection, a little bit like 3D printer technology sliced up in layers, and they are then projected onto a high-speed rotating screen. And due to the high-speed screen and the moving layers, our eyes cannot perceive the screen and blend the layers together, and almost looks like a very solid holographic object out there. And then it will become more and more advanced. This is one of the last ones, using particles in the air. It goes really physical, or let's say, from a science point of view, that was created by audio frequencies, plasma emissions to reflect laser beams, also used a lot in, let's say, music or entertainment kind of shows. So the reason why I wanted to use this kind of intervention to show, when we talk about hologram, it almost shows us that we're also talking about one type or one size fit all hologram. And here, just with 4 or 5 different slides, you basically can see that the technology is evolving in an exponential way. Some of these flat 2D holograms are already accessible, and that's what in the second part of my presentation I want to share with you, how we effectively have used that. But then some of these are not, let's say, yet accessible for, let's say, a non-specialized audience, and are actually used into advanced film production shows or very big, let's say, experience events that are out there, often connected with, let's say, high tech. So that's, let's say, the first part. I'm also going to bring in my colleague, Nicole, in case there would be additional questions that you have on the technology. But before I give the floor back and before we move into the second stage, are there any, let's say, specific questions you would have on holograms right now? I mean, this is just, let's say, the technical explanation explained in plain English. and also making sure that what follows in the second part of the presentation is that you know what we are talking about and that you already can situate it in function of the first explanation. Ursula, over to you again.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we have had a few questions come in, which I think, yeah, either you or Nicola perhaps could answer at this stage. One is around cost and logistical requirements. So people would like to have more information about that. And then another one is, what's the particular pain or problem that you see this technology as solving? Like, why should we use holograms? No doubt it's super cool, but folks want to know, why should we use holograms as opposed to something else or a person live?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe two elements on this question. I think they are fundamental questions, specifically when we're going to go now show how we have used it. We'll already address some of the question, but in anticipation, I'll give an example, because now we're moving into a post-pandemic period, hopefully very soon. I remember actually even before it was before the pandemic, referring to the innovation toolkit that the Secretary General launched together with UN Staff College. We were part of the launch, which was happening in Madrid in 2019. And suddenly I think the Secretary General, there were about 40 colleagues from New York that wanted to fly into Madrid to be present at that kind of launch event. But the Secretary General at that time already said, let's move into the definition of what essential travel is. And I don't think that you need to fly to the other side of the world just to be part of a kind of launch. So there were already movements towards, let's say, what is essential travel and how can we reduce our ecological footprint before the pandemic. During the pandemic, it had become extremely clear, and we had to redefine when are we going to be in presence and when are we going to move online, while most of us migrated online. And here is now the connection with the question, what would be the added value out of it? Well, during the pandemic, we have faced a lot of Zoom fatigue. I mean, we also experienced that the separation by screen is not the same as the more immersive experiences that are out there. And actually, our center is now in an active search. How can we create technological experiences that look more human, that are more immersive? You will see after in my second part of the presentation, we are part of this global conference on the elimination of child labor, where we successfully worked together with our ILO office in New York to do a kind of streaming of Amina, the secretary, and the Secretary General out there. What was the added value? Well, we had 1,000 delegates traveling from all over the world to this essential, let's say, conference, because it's 1 week actually moving together towards a call for action, which is negotiated and so on. So there's effectively need to be there in presence, but also 8,000 people were following that online. With creating that kind of immersive experience, we actually created added value for the conference, because usually what people would do, they would record a video and then they project the video or the Zoom call on the big screen. Well, that would be a little bit of a disappointment for someone who traveled all the way to Durban to be part of that conference. And we have seen through the interactions out there that at least it created that kind of, you had the feeling that she was out there. You will see in the other examples, you had the feeling that you could interact with someone that almost was there as if he or she would be in presence. So I think the added value is that we need to continue to experiment with these kind of new technologies and not stick with the current ones that are out there as part of what I would call a hybrid learning journey. It's not just replacing one or the other. This is not the end of face-to-face meetings, not at all, but it's like a new area where hybrid meetings are going to become much more interesting than non-stop broadcasting of Zoom webinars or just being present. And unfortunately, someone could not be there. I mean, this is definitely something. Also in the second part of my presentation, specifically for senior high-level officials that basically are living on a plane, that would be a welcome change, that maybe some of the things could be done remotely with exactly the same effect, because usually they are there for a short intervention, address the audience, do some political meetings, and then maybe there I also see some span. And that is not only in terms of cost effectiveness or in terms of ecological footprint, it's just the bigger picture out there. Which brings me to the first question, cost effectiveness, because new technologies have also a kind of a price. And maybe I anticipate on my second part of the presentation, because I see it happening with every technology. When we were part of introducing virtual reality as an immersive learning experience, and people are saying, what is the cost? And I said, well, yeah, you have to pay $500 right now to have access to an Oculus headset. And then people say, yeah, that's costly if you have a lot of people, but then it depends on how we define costs. I mean, nobody questions the price of a flight ticket from New York to Turin, which is much more expensive than $500 in most of the time. So it's also seeing what could be the return of investment on there. And that's what I would like to say also with the hologram. Now, the entire spectrum that you have seen from the simple pad to do projections towards, let's say, the ray device things, the prices are enormously, there's a big variation out there. The ones that I will show you in the examples here, I can give you exact costing because, for example, we installed a few holoboxes now, one in Turin, one in South Africa, and then hopefully one soon also in Geneva. The entire project with, let's say, the projections, the installation, the connections, I think we arrived somewhere around 40K if I have to give, let's say, a bulk figure. It's a little bit can vary, but at least you have the figure. So, and then the infrastructure stands there. But then it's up to us to make actually optimal use for it. So, and actually to have a return on investment of this 40K investments, I probably need to do more than, let's say, 40 different interventions that could have reduced the ecological footprint of the flight tickets. That could have also become enlarged our audience, but speakers that are not always available. Plus, we also can do it in live streaming version. We can do it in pre-recorded versions. So, as I said, that's just to give you a bulk figure that we're not talking about, let's say, millions anymore, but we're talking about something which is accessible, but maybe in our follow-up discussion, we need to see how can we meaningful use that, you know, just doing it there to do presentations as we were doing presentations before. Maybe we have to find also different ways to use it in an intelligent way. So these were, let's say, the two different questions that I have answered for you. And I think also my colleague Nicole is answering on the Q&As. Over to you, Ursula.
Thanks, Tom. He is indeed. And I just wonder, does Nicole want to come in and just kind of give a little bit of a rundown of some of the questions being answered in the Q&A? Because I'm not sure if the ones that are answered, if folks can see those.
Okay.
Would you like to, Nicole?
Yes, certainly. No problem at all. I answered a couple of questions on the chat answered. So I just answered one specifically about hologram integrated to the metaverse. And I would say that the metaverse is a very massive topic and very important now, and people are very interested in. But I would say that the definitions right now are very in the moment of being designed. So the technology is definitely part of the metaverse, but it would not necessarily be only the metaverse. And the idea of the metaverse meaning that we integrate the physical and the digital or technical world together. And in that sense, the hologram technology is part of the metaverse, but it will still need some further integration for it to be fully a metaverse technology, which is in the process of being created right now.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I see something else that's a question that's got a few likes, thumbs up, is the potential disadvantages of hologram technology. Are there particular risks and concerns or evil, bad uses that we need to be alert to or that you've seen?
Well, it's technology, you know, like a knife is also a technology and can be used in many different ways. I think the same is with a hologram. I think here specifically, as I said, we're doing it from a kind of a learning and communication point of view. When you would look at a hologram just for the wow effect, then, I mean, your added value will be very much limited in short time. The few examples which I will show in the second part of the presentation is if it's just to bring someone in from a, let's say, thing, and we do a little presentation out there in a kind of a holographic box, then I would say the added value is very limited. I think we need to be a bit more creative, maybe think a little bit more out of the box on how we are going to use that. And here internally, we are making let's say the exercise specifically for hybrid events. I use it now. I was last week in IFAD in Rome while I was presenting and facilitating a session in Turin. So doubling myself, I've never done that before, but here it basically works and created a little bit of added value. Also, the bad side, I mean, I would not look at always in bad side. For us, it's more in a hybrid setting, where can it create an added value? What we are doing is actually mixing different technologies. You know, the old school presential face-to-face meeting is still out there. The Zoom webinars or team webinars, they're going to connect in moments before, during, and after. Where can we see these more new technologies also not only create a wow effect, but create a kind of a new layer on top of it? Not only because technology is evolving that fast, probably the technology which I will show you in 1 minute will be already outdated in 2 years from now, but at least it gives our colleagues the impression that, I mean, technology evolution didn't start with Zoom during the pandemic. There's something happening, and specifically with immersive technologies, not only holographic ones, but also VR and AR, things are much changing faster than sometimes people are realizing, and that the resistance that was, you know, resolved during the pandemic to move towards webinars might also have a kind of a similar movement with these kind of new technologies out there. But maybe Ursula, if it would be a good idea, I can show you, let's say, the 3 cases where we have used. Because then
that's
some
perfect.
of the,
we're all excited to see them now. Please show us. We're excited. Thank you.
We will share the videos also after, because here I'm basically now just showcasing the images. I'm disappearing like a hologram right now, but let me reappear again on the presentation. So 3 examples, very concrete. I'm telling you how it worked. Like here on the picture, every year in Turin, we organize a kind of an innovation day where we show the latest technologies that we use. And here, to make it also clear, because we work in development context, it's not always the high tech. You know, we are now working with very low tech community radio solutions, which are basically podcast 2.0 that are connected with social networks. And it has an equal high effect than, for example, the holographic experiences that you can see here. But we are asking other questions. For example, for us, it's always extremely important on this day, because it's a bit of a celebration of the potential of the Learning Center, that we could also have the presence of our Director General. Now, in that period, we are in a transition stage in our organization. As I said, Director Generals in general, they live on a plane moving from one point to the other, but now it was stuck through the pandemic. Moving was not possible. So for us to have Guy Ryder here, as you see him available in this kind of holobox type of situation, and you see it through the reaction of the colleagues, nobody is watching, they're all basically filming and taking pictures with their smartphone out there. But that actually resolves a little bit the effect. People really had the idea that the Director General was in the room. And moreover, it was also live when he basically finished his initial address to the staff and the motivational words. There was also a live conversation that felt really as if he was there. Otherwise, the Director General would have had to basically travel through 3 or 4 hours to Turin, go back, basically lose a day, while now the total amount of spent for him was less than 1 hour, with exactly the same effect that if he would be traveling. So there I would see a kind of potential for these kind of interventions that are short to the point and that actually do not require, let's say, travel. And what you see here is then a box, but what is happening right now, the box will gradually disappear. Now there is an active use of what I would call these kind of transparent screens, so that we don't have to put people in boxes anymore, and that we finally can think out of the box. The screen would then resolve in the larger light of the conferencing room. And also when we asked the Director General for him, I mean, from the April Fool's story that I was telling right now, connected with some of the science fiction imaginations that you had in your childhood. Now, as I said, the article that we wrote on it was, well, holograms are becoming real. The second example was, again, used at a high level events where we basically were streaming Amina Mohammed from New York to Durban. And maybe I here give a little bit the background story of it, because we were grateful for our colleagues at the ILO New York office to basically support us in that, because what happens is in the beginning, people think, okay, the Secretary General or the Under Secretary General can come to Durban, and then usually to busy agendas, it got cancelled, and we wanted to create that kind of experience. So we got into touch with our ILO New York office. They arranged a kind of a meeting, and we were able to basically record her live, and with that recording, use it into a live streaming then in Durban itself. Now things are changing. We had to have a cameraman on site who actually was recording, so there was also a cost involved in that. But more and more, what we think, if, for example, the main duty stations over the world from Bangkok to New York to Geneva and Turin would have just a box available and one recording station, so would reduce, let's say, the additional materials that we need to bring in. We could do a quick recording, we could do a live intervention, and in this way connect all the different duty stations together right now. I also will share the live video of the thing so that you also can see how it basically happens. Which brings me to the third case, which I basically experienced personally last week. I was facilitating a retreat for IFAD in Rome, but at the same time, there's the annual meeting of all the learning managers here in Turin with our colleagues of UN Staff College, doing two things at the same time, as where I went into also a pre-recording of my intervention out there, which then got live streamed in a hologram for the audience out here. And then the question was, yeah, would there be a possibility to be in multiple spaces at the same time, given that we are sometimes juggling with very busy agendas? And here, reflecting back on the experience of participants, I mean, they had almost the feeling that I was there, at least for a moment. Then my colleagues took over in a hybrid mode and engaged interactively and helped us in a brainstorm about what could be the potential use of a holographic box like this, or maybe also more advanced technologies. And that brings me to a few reflections that I would like to do with you and with the group out here, where your inputs would be really welcome. Well, some of the lessons that we have learned when we start to actively experiment with new technologies, whether that's with virtual reality or holograms out here, something changed. It's almost something changed in the sense that I always use the quote, we're not talking about technological headsets anymore, but we're talking about changing mindsets. Through the conversations I had with my colleagues in actually integrating new technologies, we also changed the way how we were thinking about events, how we were starting to organize them, and how we basically went deeper into the design of the format. And then also in a playful way, here you see our innovation day, all the colleagues were trying out the HoloBox. It was almost, let's say, a kind of a very informal way to really get in touch with that technology also in a non-technical way, so that they don't have to be afraid for new technology. It's out there and you can experiment with it. So that was the first, let's say, the proactive experimentation of colleagues to get them more literate with technology is an added value that we have learned. It's also a handy alternative for the Zoom fatigue that many of those have, and it also increased the wow factor of your, let's say, your high level or your big events that you have out there. It also questions us, who needs to be there, who and what and where. The notion of essential travel, which has been extensively discussed in the UN system. Well, there will be technological solutions that are going to go a little further than just being present through a Zoom webcam that has still the background of your kitchen or anything else like that. There are more professional ways also how we could leverage this kind of remote presence in a more immersive way. And then last but not least, still here we are standing. I mean, this could be very useful for dynamic TED Talks, you know, like where you only do a 10-15 minute conversation. I don't see talking for 1 hour in a hologram as an added value. You would fall asleep anyhow. So let's think outside the box on how we can use it. And through collective brainstorm, we're now putting a list of things that we could do. Could we do remote facilitation of working groups through these kind of holographic facilitators that are somewhere presented all over the globe? That's just one question. The box, when in Durban, I mean, we used it for 1 or 2 interventions and then it was standing there. What we did was actually did a pre-recording of children that were basically playing that supported the entire communication and advocacy message that the entire Durban call for action was basically promoting. So it was also used as part of the larger, let's say, conference setting as such. And it helped us to think across, okay, what can we do with new technologies beyond the wow effect and by creating some added value. And then that's what I would like to hear also from you. Where do you see additional potential out there? Maybe taking into account two final notes out there. Holograms are getting real. I mean, you have seen the, let's say, the three examples that have gone, although they're not yet advanced holograms in its three-dimensional sense, they create the feeling of there's a human being in the room while he or she is not out there. Take into account that also all the big, let's say, technology players are already into the next stage, which I did not present here. Google's Project Starline is one of them. They have these 3D box hologram. The main difference is that we have here really volume and depth in the real 3D holograms, and it's currently already available in some of the offices that they are experimenting with it. So I see more things coming out of there. And then also what Microsoft is moving on the holoportation, using then the only disadvantage here again, we connected with mixed reality, so that you actually need to use again, let's say the Microsoft HoloLens in order to see the elements that are out there, but it could require some new elements out there. I just wanted to add these two final slides in there to say, well, there are, let's say, interesting things happening out there. And of course, this could seem like a story of a high-tech type of feature, but as I've said, with the stories that we're doing currently on virtual reality, for example, with the World Food Programme, we were doing real simulations in VR on, let's say, pre-disaster type of planning. And the budgets were even lower than, let's say, the higher simulations that they were doing in the field once or twice a year. So there was also a kind of a cost-cutting effect, but also technology. When we think about, it doesn't need to be low tech or high tech, it needs to be, for me, accessible tech and inclusive tech. And that's when we can start to think a little bit out of the box, instead of thinking in types of, let's say, technological stereotypes. And that's why I think these tech talks here that UN Innovation Network are organizing are extremely useful. So let me go back to maybe a few more questions, taking also the time into account. Ursula, over to you.
Thanks so much, Tom, and also Nicole. This is fantastic. Lots of questions are coming in, and we will turn to them in a few moments. But I also wanted to flag that if anyone would actually like to ask them live, you can also raise your hand, and we ought to be able to enable you to speak. So perhaps actually, if my colleague Ray, if he could have a look at the participants list and see if anyone has raised their hand, and then I think he can also then enable them to speak. But while we see if anyone wants to do that, I see some colleagues are already eager and wanting to know, do we have any of this technology, for instance, like the box in Geneva or New York or any other of the places where the UN is?
Okay. We have currently, there are two things here. There's the box where you saw the projection. That's one thing. We have one standing here in Turin, which can also be jointly used also by our colleagues from Staff College, which they did last year. We don't have yet a box, for example, in New York, but what we would like to do in our kind of little dream is if there could be recording stations in the different duty station. And with a recording station, we're not talking the last picture that you saw with the two colleagues. It's basically a white type of background with some lighting in there and the use of, let's say, a high level camera, whatever. I mean, there are different brands out there, but they're accessible in terms of price. And that is basically already enough to do, let's say, the recording of these kind of interventions. When we then would have to have live interactions, we also need to connect it with an additional modem in there. But the first step would be having different recording stations out there, which are very accessible in terms of, let's say, pricing, I would say. The second step is, where do we need those holo boxes? Well, here in Turin, we need it because we are a training center, a knowledge sharing center. So here are the events happening almost on a weekly basis. I'm not sure whether it would be an added value to have it in every office out there, but maybe explore where are these events taking place? Where could it really create an added value? Whether it's that in New York, Bangkok, or Pretoria. I mean, I leave that up for the people who actually are around it. But this would be, as I said, we are initial stage. In the beginning, we have sent the box to Geneva on a rental base, but that was just for a short temporary period. But my idea is now to actually seek out, and maybe, you know, in Geneva I was saying the overall cost of a 45K investment, if that's carried out by 4 or 5 agencies out there, it's quite limited in terms of investment, and it's still out there and can be used by the different agencies. Back to you.
Tom, Nicole, maybe you would like to put your email address or how best people can contact you into the chat, because I also see some questions there with folks wanting more detail. And if I understand correctly from prior chats with ITC-ILO, this is actually something that you can collaborate on and actually facilitate. Like if there was an agency, right, that wanted to use this, that they could be in contact with you, and that's something that you could assist with. Is that not correct?
Yeah, and you can basically, we are collaborating with different UN agencies on projects, because also there, I've seen some people who say like, well, that seems a little bit expensive. Well, it's a one-stop cost. It's not a license fee like what you would have with the other ones, which is recurrent. Once the installation is out there, you're automatically move on. And that's what I said, that then the cost becomes through a different kind of perspective. But just to mention, at least there's a return of investment if that would reduce the air travel or the other costs that are involved with, let's say, face-to-face presentations out there.
Fantastic. Ray, are there any people who've actually raised their hand that would like to actually ask their question live? I
don't see anyone yet.
Okay.
Okay, I see two. Wait.
Oh, lovely. Okay, feel free. Perhaps you can, I think you have to upgrade them to a panelist, right? And maybe say their name so they know they're about to have the microphone.
Yeah, we have two colleagues. One is from FAO, Eric, and also another colleague from Khalid.
Fantastic.
Over to you.
Could you elevate them so that they could?
I already did. So Eric can share his.
Eric, do you want to go ahead?
Just unmute yourself, Eric.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks, Tom. This is great. I was just wondering whether there are, what are the costs of the various devices, and are you aware of any service providers who help organizations setting this up? Thanks.
Yeah. Well, as I said, like here, what would be interesting, we did a little comparative analysis of different service providers that are out there. Maybe, Eric, are you from the Netherlands? Can I distract it from your name or not?
Yes, you can. Yes,
okay,
but I do work for FAO in Rome.
Yeah, no, but that was just the reason why I asked it, because we work together with a Dutch startup which is called Holoconnects. But maybe Nicole, you can put the URL here in the chat. And we have been looking at a variety of them, and we were very surprised that it's still a limited amount of service providers that are moving into this kind of direction. I think we have 3 or 4 names from the States, then here from the Netherlands, because also there, as I said, when we started to work with the Netherlands, it was for Europe, it was quite okay. But for example, to get the Holobox in Durban, that was another story that Nicole was actively involved in. There are some practical, administrative and bureaucratic things to move on to it. But what we also would like to see, if, let's say, different UN agencies would move into this kind of direction, maybe together with a kind of a joint procurement, or seeing how they could do what we usually do as ITC-ILO is, collaborate on specific project and then integrate this kind of service as part of the larger project that we are doing, whether it's temporary on a rental base or into a kind of a fixed investment onto that one. Our experience has ranged from, let's say, a 10K investment for longer rental to, let's say, what we have done now, a 45K investment in the entire installation of the box, the recording station, and everything which is around, and some additional technological training around it. But that's where we are, and I'm expecting that these things also, will reduce in terms of price in the nearby future, like anything, because we're still in a very early adopters model of specifically the 2D boxes. There will be also more competition, I think, in the nearby future, and the devices will also change. What I see here as the box we have now, I don't see that box standing here in 2, 3, 4 years from now. That will be already disappeared and integrated into the larger environment due to a transparent screen or due to anything else. So we don't have that kind of infrastructural move that we need to do with the boxes all the time. There's another colleague there, I think. Khaled.
Yes, just enabled Khaled to speak if you'd like to.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I'm calling from UNICEF Regional Office in Nairobi. So definitely this is a interesting technology, frontier technology. And there are definitely a good use case, as Tom, you explained quite passionately. Just wondering whether it will be possible to share some of the architectural high-level schematic documents, and if you have a list of vendors with whom you worked, whether you have long-term agreements, and those obviously via email, that will be really useful. I would really like to kind of like make a case internally related to all sort of work arrangements that are being considered or discussed almost post-COVID scenario, hybrid, work from home, etc., and obviously with the travel. So yeah, that's all. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I will share that with the group, because also that cannot be underestimated. Specifically in the initial stage when we started, there were a few things from an architectural point of view. What kind of internet connectivity is needed to such a box? What kind of electricity is needed? So we had to also face with our, let's say here, our internal services around it, which went quite smooth, but there are some things to consider. It's not just, buying a smartphone by way of speaking. So it requires a little bit of more extended consultation. But as I said, once you're over that initial phase, then it's basically the people that are dealing with our, let's say, our screens or our things. Actually, for them, it's an additional feature now into our conferencing room, which makes like a post-pandemic type of, let's say, world also a little bit more interesting in terms of technology, while not always watching to the same kind of screen. At this stage, we don't have any long-term agreement, as we have done this as part of a few innovation projects around, but I'm also keen to see how we could structurally move into that direction, maybe with a few other UN agencies out there. So definitely something that we can explore, and the technical information, definitely that's something that I would be able to share. My email also is here already in there. Is there anybody else?
Yes, there's a couple of others in a health-related context. One, some folks are interested in use cases for health, and then on the other side, some folks are wondering what are the health implications, if you know, of using technologies such as this and VR and AR as well. Are there studies that you're aware of that are looking at like impacts on the brain of people who are watching holograms? Or I see Nicole's also kind of typing an answer, but if you've got any thoughts on that. And just a reminder to colleagues too, you can, if there's an existing question that's been asked and you want to vote it up, you can also do that by clicking the thumbs up. But maybe you want to speak to, either of you want to speak to what you know about the health dimensions, either use cases or if there's any, negative impacts that you're aware of.
Yeah, well, the impact of any new technology always comes after the facts in one way or another. We are actually investigating quite hard in the use of VR and AR, specifically virtual reality, because there were some, the kind of seasickness after your initial experience with that kind of headset and adapting it on the go. So there was already a little bit of empirical research on these kind of headsets. From my first reaction and gut point of view on these holobox, this is a completely different ball game, because you're in a room, you don't have anything on your physical body. You're just, instead of watching a screen, you're watching another kind. So in terms of, let's say, potential dangers for occupational safety and health, I think that's going to be the same debate that you have with like, what is the impact of Wi-Fi into a physical classroom? So I'm not, let's say, the person to respond to that, but as they all make use of, let's say, existing technologies that are certified, that are following all the different protocols, I don't think there's any, let's say, exposure in terms of radiation, in terms of other way. What I would recommend, and that's very bad for your health, is falling asleep from long presentations, from other things, so that we need to work on how are we dealing with this new technology so that people get excited, get motivated, get connected, get collaborated. Because someone mentioned also in the chat that there's still a kind of tendency now, even in this post-pandemic, that people say, no, we need to go back to our usual face-to-face meetings because we are human beings and we need to connect. I fully agree that we need to connect, but it's a little bit of a pity with all these new technologies around that we cannot scale up our interactions. The mandate of our many UN agencies is much bigger than the amount of physical face-to-face meetings that we can basically undertake. So I would say scale up your face-to-face meeting into a hybrid meeting, so that what we did in Durban last year or 2 years ago before pandemic only reached 1,000 people. Now we are reaching 8,000 people that are really keen to spread, let's say, the advocacy message on the important theme was out there. So for me, it's more a kind of a question, again, let's scale it up, let's make it hybrid, and let's use the best of both worlds for a very specific need that is out there. And then there will be side effects. There will be a reduced ecological footprint. There will be a kind of an innovation visibility for your organization, that you're also jumping on the technological train and not just resist until you're forced to move there, as happened in the pandemic. Because look at the pandemic before, how you connected with webinars, and look at after. Do we need other disruptions to embrace technology in a critical, sound way, but also making use of it so that we can also accelerate the work we do?
Fantastic, Tom. I think we just have a couple of minutes left, but Nicole, you've been also looking at the questions in the Q&A. Anything that's come up in that context that you wanted to add to what Tom has said? Burning questions folks have got?
I guess I would say there's a couple of questions regarding the potentials of using holograms in the context of educations, and how we could sell curricula, and also the potential effects that could have on lowering jobs for others. But I would say that the most important thing about holograms is when you have the live interaction. So even if you could potentially sell content that is already prepared with a hologram, the most important or the most human aspect of the holograms itself is when the person is live, and it's not a recording, and it's not content that has been previously made. As the technology's strongest advantage is that you are able to interact with the people who are not there with you. So the idea that we could sell the content kind of defeats the purpose of the person actually being there, and it would not allow for conversations and for interactions with students. And therefore, I wouldn't potentially suggest that would be the best solution in that case, holograms. There are other questions more on the costs and the technical aspects of what is required for the content to appear. And again, there are multiple ways that you can use holograms. The cheapest or the most successful one that we tested and accomplished is the one that Tom was exposing, the box and the recording studio, which are very simple. The box comes with everything. Yes, it has a cost. It's not nothing, but as Tom was saying, since it's expected to be used for a while, then that covers the costs of sending people over without having the travel costs considered. But also the recording studio can be very simple, just as the images showed. It just needs a 4K camera, can be whatever camera, and a white background, some plexiglass. Very simple, do it yourself. You can kind of recreate it in any booth. So it's on that end, it can be recreated in a simple way, and it can be done in a more professional way as well.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I think we've almost reached the end of the hour. So with that, thank you to you and to Tom, and thanks, Tom, also for putting your email address in the chat. So I'm sure you're going to get some emails, as colleagues are quite interested in knowing more about the detail and cost and possibilities to collaborate, etc. Also wanted to thank, as always, Johanna for being a fantastic partner in crime on this series. And in this case, also to thank Beata of ILO New York, who brought this particular area and ITC-ILO to our attention. presentation, and also to our colleague Ray, who's been helping us behind the scenes for this webinar as well. So as always, you will find the recording and the slides on the UN Innovation Network website, and we invite you to go there. And you'll see the slides and the recording, and do feel free to follow up with our wonderful colleagues, Tom and Nicole. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye all.
Bye, thank you.